We begin our story in the Chinese city of Tianjin, where a wave of international attention has been drawn by the arrival of world leaders gathering for a major regional security summit. A summit that is being closely watched because of the tensions that exist between several of the attending nations in the West, particularly the United States. The event has the feel of something more than just a diplomatic get-together. It carries an air of strategic maneuvering, quiet negotiations, and the subtle signaling that comes with global politics. Vladimir Putin has made a rare trip outside Russia, a move that underscores how significant this summit is in the current international climate. His presence is especially striking because it comes at a time when Moscow faces the looming threat of new sanctions from the United States if it fails to comply with demands for a ceasefire in Ukraine, a conflict that continues to reshape alliances and challenge old assumptions about power and influence. Adding to the weight of this gathering, Iran's president has also arrived, representing a country that remains heavily criticized by Washington for its support of militant groups across the Middle East. And then there is India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who has stepped onto Chinese soil for the first time in 7 years. His visit comes at a sensitive moment, given that the United States has just imposed steep new trade tariffs on India, a move President Donald Trump has said is punishment for India's decision to buy Russian oil and weapons. Modi's arrival is therefore more than symbolic. It signals the search for alternatives and new economic partners at a time when India finds itself squeezed by Washington's pressure. Already, Modi has sat down with China's President Xi Jinping for a bilateral meeting, and the early reports suggest that the talks went surprisingly well. According to Chinese state media, the two leaders reached an understanding that relations between Delhi and Beijing could become more stable and far-reaching, a prospect that only a few years ago would have seemed unlikely given the long history of disputes and tensions between the two nations. On the ground in Tianjin, there is a sense of excitement about hosting the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit, a gathering that has steadily grown in scope and importance since its creation. But as often happens with events like this, it is not the formal sessions that grab the headlines but the side meetings that take place behind closed doors, the conversations between leaders whose countries have as much history of rivalry as they do of potential cooperation. The meeting between Xi Jinping and Narendra Modi stands out as a moment that could signal a shift because the timing is so striking. India, freshly hit by punishing U.S. tariffs, is now looking at its options, and China, sensing the opportunity, is extending an olive branch by suggesting that the time has come for the two Asian giants to patch up their differences. During their discussions, both sides declared the talks a success, but beyond the official statements there are layers of meaning worth examining. Xi Jinping, speaking in his characteristically grand style, reminded Modi that the world is in a period of profound transformation, and that in such times it is essential for China and India not only to see each other as partners, but to behave as good neighbors. He even repeated a phrase he has used before, likening the two countries to a dragon and an elephant that must walk together in harmony, an image that has become something of a catchphrase for his vision of Sino-Indian cooperation. Modi, for his part, was more specific, highlighting the agreement reached by their special representatives on managing their disputed border areas. This is not a small matter, because in recent years those remote, rugged regions have been the site of deadly clashes between Indian and Chinese soldiers, confrontations that reminded the world just how volatile the relationship can be. The new agreement signals at least a shared desire to prevent those kinds of dangerous flare-ups from recurring. Modi also announced that direct flights between the two nations would resume, a practical but powerful step given that such flights had been suspended, cutting off not only tourism but also student exchanges and business travel. The resumption of flights is a symbol that the relationship may be ready to move beyond suspicion and into renewed connectivity. Modi further emphasized that the well-being of 2.8 billion people, the combined populations of India and China, depends on whether their leaders can work together, and he added that their cooperation would benefit the entire global community. It was, in many ways, an optimistic and forward-looking message, one that contrasted with the icy tone that had dominated relations in recent years. Observers noted that the meeting felt almost like a diplomatic love fest, a sharp change from the bitter mood of just a few years earlier. this bilateral encounter highlights a broader question. What role does the Shanghai Cooperation Organization play in the shifting balance of global power? To explore that, analysts point to the SCO's history and ambitions. What began in the 1990s as a loose coalition of 5 countries focused on fighting drug trafficking and terrorism along the Chinese, Central Asian border has since expanded into a more ambitious organization that seeks to provide a platform for security, economic cooperation, and even a challenge to the Western-led international order. In 2001, it formally became the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and over the years it has grown to include 10 nations, bringing together countries with very different histories, interests, and political systems. For China, the SCO is a chance to showcase a new model of international governance, one that does not rely on the post-World War II institutions created under American leadership, the so-called Bretton Woods system. Instead, Beijing presents the SCO as a forum where countries of the global South and those dissatisfied with the West dominance can find common ground. The timing is also telling. China has linked the SCO's mission to the 80th anniversary of the end of World War II, casting it as part of a historical arc that challenges old hierarchies and promotes multipolarity. That makes the meeting between Modi and Tsai even more significant, because it demonstrates that the SCO is not merely about small Central Asian states, but about heavyweight powers with the capacity to shape global outcomes. The fact that 2 strategic rivals like India and China are now exploring cooperation within this framework shows just how much the landscape is shifting. Yet we cannot overlook the role of Russia in all this. For Moscow, participation in the SCO is less about dramatic breakthroughs and more about continuity, about reinforcing an already close partnership with China. Vladimir Putin's bilateral meeting with Xi Jinping at the summit is just one in a long series of encounters between the 2 leaders who have met dozens of times over the last quarter century. Their relationship has been described as a strategic alliance, one that has deepened particularly since the early 2000s with the construction of energy pipelines and other major projects, and which has grown even tighter since 2022, when Russia's invasion of Ukraine led to unprecedented Western sanctions. China has effectively become Russia's economic lifeline, buying up its oil and gas exports, providing alternative markets, and helping Moscow reorient its economy away from Europe and toward Asia. Without this support, Russia would find it much harder to sustain its war effort in Ukraine. For Beijing, the partnership ensures access to resources and a reliable ally in its broader contest with the United States. The SCO summit in Tianjin therefore serves as both a symbol and a practical mechanism for these shifting alliances, showing that while the West tries to isolate Moscow, in much of the rest of the world Russia still has influential partners. Taken together, the scenes unfolding in Tianjin reveal a world in flux. Old assumptions about who aligns with whom are being tested, and leaders are carefully weighing their options in an environment where U.S. influence, though still enormous, is no longer uncontested. For India, the choice is especially delicate. On the one hand, it remains a democracy with deep ties to the West, but on the other hand, it is reluctant to become overly dependent on Washington, especially when American policies threaten its economic interests. For China, outreach to India is part of a broader strategy to expand its influence and reduce hostility along its borders, while at the same time showcasing the SCO as a credible alternative to Western-dominated institutions. For Russia, the summit is another opportunity to signal that it is not isolated, that it still sits at the table with major powers. For Iran, participation signals defiance of Washington and solidarity with other countries seeking autonomy in their foreign policy. And for the smaller Central Asian nations that helped start the SCO, the summit provides a chance to balance the competing pressures of larger neighbors while carving out their own space in global affairs. What emerges is a picture of a multipolar world where alliances are fluid, interests are pragmatic, and summits like the one in Tianjin are stages where new patterns of cooperation are tested. Whether the dragon and the elephant truly walk side by side remains to be seen, but the fact that their leaders are even willing to talk in such terms marks a significant change. For viewers trying to understand why this matters, consider that together China and India account for more than a third of the world's population and a massive share of its economic growth. If they find a way to cooperate, even partially, the consequences will be felt everywhere, from trade flows to climate negotiations to regional security. If they remain rivals, then the potential for conflict and disruption remains equally significant. The SCO summit may not resolve these tensions overnight, but it highlights the possibilities, the risks, and the ongoing evolution of a world where the old rules no longer apply and new arrangements are still taking shape.